In today's lesson, we will be discussing academic language in physical education. Briefly, we'll talk about what it is, how you develop it in your class, examples, how students in your class should use it, and we'll talk about the all-important requirements of the edTPA and how to use it in your lesson plans. So what is academic language? Simply, it's the oral and written language used for academic purposes. It's what we use within physical education lessons to transfer knowledge to our students. This is how we use the language in physical education. When we're talking about movement, when we're talking about the body, the skills and performance, the cues that we give, the offensive and defensive strategies when we're playing games, fitness concepts, the affective, cognitive, psychomotor domains, and then when we're discussing standards, whether they be national or state. That is the language of physical education. How do we develop academic language? There are three elements to design an academic language-rich environment. The function, the language function, number one. What verbs are we using for our units, for our lessons? We're trying to use the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy here, which we'll discuss in the next slide or so. It's essential for student learning, utilizing the proper language function. We want to use it within the unit, and we want to tie it to our central focus, as I will discuss later. The second element is the learning task, where the students practice the language function. So students would be moving while creating and verbally stating the movement sentences. So they're practicing these skills. The students are writing, they're reading, verbally stating the language that we as physical educators have established for them to use. And then additional language demands, how? The how do we accomplish the language in physical education to accomplish the task that we've established for our students. Vocabulary, you can use word walls for this. We want to discuss syntax, the conventions, writing correct sentences, discourse, or how the students talk, how they write, how they're participants in the construction of knowledge. An example of discourse would be students would create movement sentences with a partner. They could write complete and correct sentences on the board, use an exit slip, or write in journals. That is how we develop an academic language-rich environment. Another way that we can utilize to assist us, I should say, in developing this academic language in physical education is the utilization of Bloom's taxonomy. This wheel here, at the core of the wheel, right in there, that's Bloom's taxonomy. That is the founding of Bloom's taxonomy. And in each of those areas are some ways to accomplish the academic language. More specifically, in Bloom's taxonomy in physical education, we start at the bottom with remembering. This is the basic, where students are just listing health-related fitness components if we're in a fitness unit. The next level up, students understand. They're in that understanding area. So now not only can they list the components, but they can explain each of them. And as they move up into the applying, now they're looking at how they can change the activity that they're working on to reach their target heart rate. The higher up we go to analyzing, now students in activity could be use the FIT principle to show differences and similarities between each of the health-related fitness components. Second to last, evaluate. So we want students comparing maybe the pre and post fitness scores, evaluating their progress throughout their fitness plan, and then recommend changes relating to what they've learned. So they're evaluating their program. And ultimately, we would like students to create a fitness plan related to their personal goals and their fitness scores. This is what we want to see in our academic planning. Administrators, especially those that are not familiar with physical education, never spent any time as a teacher, they really are looking for that creating, evaluating, analyzing. They like lessons written in there. That does not mean that they don't understand that you can be in those lower parts. At the beginning of a unit, beginning of a concept, you're going to be in those lower levels, but you want your students to progress to the top where they're analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So, how should students use academic language in physical education? Well, especially in elementary PE, when the written language is at a basic level, any pictures that you can add with the words will complement the learning. And as a middle school physical educator, it works with them too. They love visuals. Give your students visuals. It will assist you. Demonstrations, you should not just be saying movement cues, telling them what performance you want them to demonstrate. You have to demonstrate or have a demonstration of some sort so the students can visually see that. Students should say the vocabulary and use it in sentences. It does not have to be as a whole class repeating after you, but you want the students becoming familiar with the language you're using in your units, and that's one way you can do that. Let the students read the words. Make sure they're reading meaningful sentences and writing meaningful sentences and stories using the various words. Depending at the level that you're teaching, there's a lot of freedom, a lot of creativity you can have, but just let these students use the academic language so they can become comfortable with it like we are as physical educators. Have them listen to key vocabulary that's written down. It's not good enough to just put it on a word wall. Speak it. Have them speak it. Let it be part of your instruction. Now, administrators are big in bringing other content into physical education. They want students in PE to read, to write. Well, this is what it looks like in our curriculums, in our settings, and you need to be, as a physical educator, you need to be able to describe to an administrator that yes, my students are reading, they are writing. It just looks a little different than it does in a language arts classroom. Reading in physical education can be graphs, diagrams you have, any of the cue cards or station cards, that's reading. Interpreting the data, fitness data, if they're looking at that and interpreting it, that's reading. Any research you have them doing outside of class, maybe you have them evaluate recordings if you're lucky enough to have the technology to record performances and they can evaluate themselves or their peers. Speaking in PE, explanations, instruction, questioning, describing, all of these are how we speak. Not only in the other subjects, but in our content as well. Writing in physical education looks like notes, plans, reflections, exit slips, cognitive tests, illustrating, peer and self-assessments. All of these things are ways to write in physical education. And I'll talk more about exit slips as a suggestion coming up. So to engage students in using the academic language, these are the things you can do. We discuss word walls. Make sure that they're current, they're linked to what you're discussing, what you're teaching. Tag games, whatever game you're playing. They can use spelling, vocabulary, or words in various ways. Be creative, but incorporate this academic language in your activities, not just to complete your edTPA. Use this throughout. Movement sentences, posters with cues and objectives, the graphs, pictures, charts, the checking for understanding, asking questions, describing and analyzing movement skills, whether it's themselves or their peers, procedures to games and activities. These are all ways to immerse students in the academic language. Reflections, journals, goal setting, all of these are great ways to have the students learn the academic language and become more comfortable with it. The all-important requirements for the edTPA. Now this right here, this comes directly from the assessment handbook. Says up there, use rubric 4 as a guide. And that is what the score of your edTPA is going to be using. They're going to be looking at rubric 4 and a few other pieces that go along with that I will discuss. If you can follow this step by step and you can grasp each of these A, B, C, and D areas, you will be in a great position to bring the academic language not only to the forefront in your edTPA, but into your classes where it's most important. It's essential for students to feel like they can comprehend what's going on. So for A, the language function, you're going to choose one language function that's essential for the student learning whatever your central focus is. It's key. Make sure you link the language function to your central focus. And those language functions you see here are analyze, contrast, describe, interpret, sequence, or signal. So what are the students going to be doing linked to the central focus utilizing those language functions? You see the first bullet point, create an academic language objective in relation to your lesson focus. Make sure they link up, the language objectives and your lesson focus. Here's an example. Throughout the body of the lesson, the students will create complete and correctly formulated movement sentences, showing their understanding of contrast between low, medium, and high levels as they move using a variety of movement skills called out by the teacher. There's definitely a central focus to what the students are going to be doing, and they're using the academic language there. Creating, you see that. Creating there. Contrast, you see that language function, contrast, that's in there. It's good to have that written down, but as you'll see as we go, that's not the only part of the academic language we need. B, identify a key learning task for your plans. Okay, so you've established the language function with your central focus. Now what do? You have to link that. Take the learning task from your plan, and how am I going to get my students the opportunities to practice using the language? Not only are they practicing the skills, but they should be using the language of our content as they're practicing. This is what you're trying to do. So within edTPA, they want to know where and in which lesson is this task that you say you're going to do, that you're going to get the students to practice. Just write down the lesson, the day, and number. And then how are the students going to develop it and achieve your objective for academic language? How are they going to do it? What will they be doing? Give an example of the tasks that they're going to participate in that's going to require them to use academic language. And don't just think basic here. Be creative. You want these students really using it, not just regurgitating it to make you look good for an edTPA. You want them to really grasp this academic language. C, additional language demands. So you've picked a language function, you've identified it. Now you're going to describe associated language demands. What are some demands for certain students? What are they going to need to understand to participate in this learning task? You're going to use vocabulary, symbols, signals, key phrases. And this is where our word walls, movement sentences, and things like that can come into play. And two, you want to make sure you include one of the following. Syntax. What conventions are the students going to be using? Spelling, grammar, or discourse? How are the students going to create movement sentences? You see the 2 stars and the bold sentence here, bold information. Just with any task you do as a physical educator, in addition, when you're planning for this edTPA, consider the range of students' understandings of the language function. You can use those exit slips, tickets out the door, and make it specific to what you're learning, the academic language you're learning about. Then you'll know. What do they already know? What are they struggling with? What do they not comprehend? And that will help you in your planning for future lessons. And D, language support. So you're going to look at your lesson plans, your instruction materials, and describe instructional supports prior to the learning task that is going to help the student understand and use these language functions so they can be successful. And what else in those previous prompts, A, B, and C, that we just went over, what language demands are going to pop up there? What are you going to do? What can you do to help build academic language within the learning task? How are you going to model, as the teacher, the appropriate language? Strategies. Think, pair, share, and just walk around. Listen to what the students have to say. You will learn what they're not comprehending or what they know really well. Check for understanding. Are they going to use graphic organizers? Any of those will do. How are you going to provide opportunities for guided practice? Will you? If so, how are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? And then make sure you are building these language supports into your lesson plan. And with anything, if you plan it and you go through it, you've written it down, and you can see these things, you can start seeing what students might have issue with. And if you can't, because that comes with more practice, being in a school setting a little bit more, do some of these checks for understanding, and that will give you an idea of what you need to do to strengthen the language demands and academic language within your unit. On your lesson plan, there are three things that we really need to be focused on with academic language. First one, make sure you identify an academic language objective. Use Bloom's taxonomy. You can refer to the one in this presentation. The internet, any internet search will get you a good example of Bloom's taxonomy and the language that goes with that. Make sure there is a connection with the language objective you chose and the learning task. It's imperative to do that. If you can write and you can create lesson plans that sound great on paper, but if they don't go together, if there's no connection, it does not matter. It's all about the student learning, connecting the language that you're using to the skill, to the task. Make sure you're doing that. And if you plan for it from the beginning, it's not that difficult. Trying to go back, it's just not going to look as complete to an assessor of your project. Focus on the learning task with the academic language, not the closure. Do not try to throw new things into the closure. Closure is for class discussion, reviewing. preparing for the next classes, looking ahead. Okay, they're not going to necessarily learn something new. That's what the learning tasks are for. The closure's more of reflection. If you want to use closure to get them to reflect on maybe what they're lacking with academic language, that's fine. But when you're writing it and you're planning it and you're writing it in your lessons, focus on the learning task area with the academic language. Not just I'm going to talk about it briefly at the end of class. Link it to the learning task. Now, as a reviewer of your portfolio, the assessor, the person giving you your score, this is where they're going to be looking for evidence of your academic language. And they're going to use this rubric and they're going to rate you based on what you've done using these primary sources from the planning commentary 4A to 4D. So you're planning, you're describing to edTPA what's going on, what are you going to do. Then they're going to look at your lesson plans. Okay, they told me they were going to do these activities. This was their focus. Now let me see them planning for it and see the academic language put into the lesson plans. Then they're going to look at your instructional and assessment materials. If you were practicing and you were describing the language and you wrote that in your lesson plans and it's in a video, they're going to be looking for the time frame where you're using this academic language. Any of these extra materials, they're looking that if you talked about it in your commentary, they want to see it in your materials. Basically, this all comes down to, and the whole edTPA project, not just with academic language, is plan for it. Plan for the success. If you use your assessment handbook, the rubric related to academic language, go through that step by step. When you have a central focus with every skill, every unit you do, you as a physical educator understand the terminology, the academic language that goes with that. Include it in your planning and then incorporate it. How am I going to get my students to understand this terminology, this language? And it will make your edTPA experience successful. It will make your overall time as a physical educator successful. And I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.